Tony D and Little Joan with a hot take, I guess you could call, a response to Sargon of Akkad's I despise the bourgeoisie. So, I don't dislike Carl. Let me make that clear. I'm just very confused as to the path he's going down. Now, he has a degree in philosophy. I have a degree in communications. But he seems to be conflating in this rant, and you can watch it for yourself. I don't want to show it because I always get flagged by YouTube whenever I show clips of anything. But here's the definition, according to Brave. The bourgeoisie are the middle class. In Marxist theory, the social group opposed to the proletariat in the class struggle. Here it is in the Encyclopedia Britannica with a picture of Karl Marx. Bourgeoisie, the social order that is dominated by the so-called middle class. In social and political theory, the notion of the bourgeoisie was largely a construct of Karl Marx. Do you see why I'm a little worried about Karl? Sargon of Akkad, Karl Marx of Akkad. I'm a little worried. And I don't even know if I agree that the bourgeoisie is the middle class. It seems to be something different to me. The bourgeoisie, to me, would be not the middle class, but the people who are just below the upper class. So I guess you would call them, in Dungeons and Dragons, we had different social status. So you had lower class, lower middle class, lower upper class. Then you had middle lower class. So you're at the bottom of the middle. Middle class, middle upper class. Then you have upper lower class, upper middle class, and upper class, right? So 9 categories to sort of break it down a little more. I think the people Karl is talking about or trying to communicate are somewhere around the upper middle class and upper lower class. So they're right on the cusp of becoming the upper class, or they think they are. And or they're in the upper class, but they're kind of at the bottom. But the reality is, I don't think this is a class struggle. And I think the way he's framing it, maybe because he's read a few too many of the postmodernist and Karl Marx books, he sees it as a class struggle. I don't see it as a class struggle. I think he does, to some extent anyway. He sees it, and the struggle is different. It's like the struggle is the people in that sort of band don't want to rock the boat. So they'll go along with anything as long as their lives stay the same or maybe get marginally better. But there are people who are in the lowest margins of society have the same attitude. People who are very much struggling. They have a little something, but they're so worried of losing it, they do anything to keep it, including give up their liberties. There are people in the upper echelons of society. In fact, King Charles, to me, is a perfect example of the kind of person he's talking about. King Charles seems to have no will of his own. His will is entirely with this sort of globalist order, because I think he's worried about losing what he has, which is a weird worry from a guy who's multi-millionaire, will never be poor, and is probably not going to be around too much longer. The kind of stuff that Karl seems to be frustrated about and is railing against, I don't blame him, number one. I don't blame him for being upset. it looks really bad in the UK. Super bad. And he talks a lot. He shows clips from various media people, and one of the points he talks about is digital ID. They're trying to put on a digital ID, and basically the liberals in the UK, what you would consider the liberals, are giving this sort of weak-willed, namby-pamby response. But I would say that's probably not, to classify and paint with a broad brush all liberals, is a bit much. I'm sure some people have stronger opinions. Some people they don't care. They think the digital ID is a great idea. I've seen plenty of people in all stratas of society talk about things that are like digital ID here, and some of them are very much against it, like me, and others are like, oh, who cares? Who cares? A lot like the certain medical procedure that happened a while back that they were pushing on everybody. I had people, some of my relatives who I thought were very smart and independent, said to me, oh, just take it. Grow up. I thought, whoa, wow. You're willing to, as Franklin said, trade a little liberty for some sense of security. That's what that was, by the way. This sort of security in that, well, you won't get sick if you have this. Just take it. The digital ID, of course, is the same thing. It will do nothing. Absolutely nothing. It'll punish the people who have it, and the people who work around it will abscond with whatever. They'll just do whatever the F they want until they get caught. But mostly they won't get caught or punished. Because anything that gets put on a computer, can be hacked. So imagine, you're just living your life and going to the store, and then you don't have any money. And now you have to go to the government and explain, I don't have any money, and my ID's been completely hacked, and what are you going to do about that? And the government's like, well, you're going to have to prove who you are, because now you don't have the digital ID, and that's normally how we prove things. So the real problem, I think, in the UK is the government. And I think Carl recognizes that, but his solutions are still kind of socialist light, He just kind of wants to go back to the same sort of socialism light that the UK has always had. He's talked about the NIH. That's it, right? NIH, or is it the NH? NHS, that's it. Natural Healthcare Service. And that's their government healthcare, right? And I've always said that sort of healthcare works great if you break a finger, or if you have something minor, because you can walk right into a place, get a splint, get some drugs, whatever you need. This is sort of the way it is in Canada, and then you're on your way. They'll patch you up and put you on your way. But when you need something long term, you need a diagnosis, see if you have some sort of chronic condition that maybe you need an operation for or something, then they're terrible. The Canadian health system, I've heard such horror stories from friends of mine who were Canadians, and it's just terrible because you can't get seen by a doctor when you need it, when you're in an emergency that's very serious. A broken finger is just not that serious, and the reason you can get seen quickly is because it's a problem that can be fixed mostly in a matter of an hour or two. But, something like you don't feel right and you're having fainting spells, that may require a bunch of tests. And then it may require various treatments and follow-ups. And when you have a national system that's completely overwhelmed, especially by immigrants, it's just not going to work. You're just not going to get the care you need because you need frequent visits to the doctor to get on top of your condition so you could treat it and then be fine. And also, too, you need what you would call wellness, right? You need checkups, depending on your age. You need to say, oh, okay, let's check in on Mr. Smith. He's hitting 50. He needs a colonoscopy and a couple other tests just to make sure he's okay in case he had something that we could treat early that'll be easier to treat. But you can't get that on our nationalized system, especially when it's overwhelming. Maybe in certain parts of the country you could, where there's not millions of people, like London. But in most areas of the country, there's all these wait times. So the problem isn't the fact that you have a communist government, and although immigrants are exacerbating the problem is you have a socialized system to begin with. You need to get off that system. You need to have a system in which people go into the hospital and they pay money and they get treatment. And if you don't have money, well, then you're kind of scrambling to, hopefully find a solution to your finances, or maybe you go into debt, or maybe you find some sort of program outside the hospital that will eventually pay some or most or all your bills. There were systems like that here in South Jersey, for instance. So before the Obamacare thing was sort of forced on people, the local hospital here had what was called charity care. And they had certain rules to it, like the number one rule was you had to prove that you had a bank account with less than $7,500 worth of assets. And as long as you had under that, you qualified for charity care. And then the hospital, just the hospital, wasn't like a big state program, would then give you most of your care for free. Like the doctors would donate and waive their fees. And then certain things you would have to pay for. Like I went in for a wrist thing, and I had to pay for, actually I got it right here. Now these days you can get it in a drugstore, but this one initially I had to pay $75 for at a hospital, and then later I found out you could buy them for like $20. Maybe it was a technology thing. Now they're cheaper, I guess. I had to get my gallbladder out. I was still on charity care. The head of surgery did my operation. He donated. He waived his fee, and he did the operation. And the one thing I had to pay for was the anesthesia. And the anesthesiologist, I'm not sure why. I guess he didn't waive his fee. So my operation, I think it cost $2,000 or $3,000. And then the hospital worked out a payment plan that I could afford, and I paid it off in a couple of years. So that was a win-win for the hospital and me. Now I'm on a system which is, like yours, kind of unsustainable. Under the Obama system, and in New Jersey, I now have free healthcare for everything. I got glasses, dental, anything I want. If I want to just go have tests, if I want to walk into a hospital in the dead of night, and I had to one night, it turns out I had gout. I was in such pain. I went into the hospital. They diagnosed me, and didn't cost me a dime. Just waved my magic card. But somebody had to pay for that. It wasn't me. And while I'm not abusing the system, I only used it when I absolutely needed it. Other people will. Other people are hypochondriacs. Other people they're just old and lonely. Other people are crazy. And, and a lot of people, up until Trump got in, were here in this country illegally and could just waltz in if they qualified and had one of my cards, and get whatever they needed. So the problem is government in the, you know, not the middle class with that. And when you're talking about the other policies that Carl wants for his country, a lot of them are the result of the economy and the government working against the people. So one of the things and I don't have time to break it down everything, and every time I play a clip, I get flagged by YouTube. But he talks about how Liz Truss, the former prime minister, was thrown out basically by, I guess they were a bunch of banking guys, some in the government and some not. Yeah, that's a real problem. We have that problem here. It's called the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a public-private entity, and it's been the source of villainy for us libertarians for many years. And while you don't have that, you definitely have a similar sort of system, because you have these guys with all the money and they have all the power, and they're, they basically changed your prime minister because they didn't like what she was gonna do. That's part of the problem. It's not the bourgeoisie. I mean, there are people who are idiots at every level and social class and walk of life. The bourgeoisie, or the middle class, a lot of people are just apolitical. They don't follow politics, or they've been caught up in propaganda. In your country, again, that's a huge problem. The BBC is a huge problem. It's a government entity which also reports on news, and even their non-news stuff is full of propaganda, as Paul Joseph Watson has shown. That's a huge problem. A huge problem. The BBC should absolutely be privatized. It should be cut off from the government completely, and the government shouldn't have any kind of, TV station, radio, internet. I mean, it should have a website, but that should be completely government run and completely transparent. That, like the White House has a website. Here, the White House puts out videos, but they're very clearly marked. We know they're from the government. So you can take that for what it's worth. Oh, this is from the government. Okay. Is it propaganda? Well, probably, but at least I know what I'm watching. When you watch something from the BBC and it's Newsnight or whatever, the implication is, well, this is news. It's not propaganda. And we all know it basically is propaganda. But there has to be some separation. Now, we have that separation in the States for what good it did us, but eventually it slowly got corrupted over time. So, by the government, by the way. But now what's happening? It's the consequence of that corruption. All the mainstream media is dying. It's all dying here. In the UK, BBC can't die. You're paying for it. You're being forced to fund it with taxpayer money. If you weren't forced to fund it with taxpayer money, what would happen to the BBC? It would probably disappear overnight and be gobbled up by another corporate entity, or it would be forced to change its tactics so it could make money again. Or make money. It's never made money, I guess, but so it could make money. It would force to say, oh, well, we can't do all this nonsense with Doctor Who. Let's go back to the Doctor Who that made us all kinds of crazy money. So the problem is government, in my view. Your government. The problem is not middle class. And when you say middle class, you seem to separate the blue-collar workers from that group. But they are the middle class. And most of them are more pragmatic. And not all. Some blue-collar guys, plumbers, or whatever, they were all about Kamala Harris because like some of the people in the group you're trying to articulate here, they would be more akin to sheeple. They believe what they saw in the news, they believe what their friends say, and thus they believe in the status quo. Most people believe in the status quo. It's only unusual people like Carl, myself, and others that don't believe in the status quo. We don't take it at face value. It's very hard to bring people over to your side in that manner. So it's not their social economic conditioning. It's hard to convince a poor guy of that situation. It's hard to convince someone like King Charles, probably harder, that some of the policies that the conservatives need and want would be good for Britain. Otherwise, he would already support it and do it. They're comfortable. There are a lot of people are just comfortable in what they're doing, and they don't really want to think too hard about politics or what's going on in the world. I have many relatives like that. I have a relative. This person doesn't really read books. I would say never reads books. Doesn't go on the internet, so they're an older relative. So gets no info from the internet. They're still reading newspapers and watching TV. They don't have a college degree. They argue with me at politics all the damn time. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. And I say that frequently. I'm like, how can you sit there and argue these points when you know nothing? They dismiss everything I've ever learned on the internet. They're just deeply ignorant of the issues and continue to be, but proudly proclaim that they know something. They will cite their friends as sources. How can you be right when all my friends say X? How can you be right when every TV channel says you're wrong? And all the clips I see on TV validate my status quo opinion. And same thing with newspapers. I showed them one time. Here are the local newspapers you use. Here's who owns them. Here are the sources for their information. It made no impression whatsoever. Older people are set in their ways. This is true. But, this would be a person I think Carl would classify as the bourgeoisie. They don't know anything, but they're sure they know it. And they keep pushing the status quo. And it's mostly because they don't know what else to do. They're so deeply ignorant. And Carl is right that many of them just want to maintain, I'm a good person. Now, part of that he wove into, I'm a harmless person. I don't think that's important. That's sort of more important to women, I think, than men. The men just go along sometimes with what women do because they think it'll get them more women. That's what you have to do, right? If you want to have a woman, men will sometimes say anything. And if it's something they don't feel particularly strong about, like politics, they'll just go along with her politics because they're getting what they want. And it's not politics. So, for me and my girlfriend who don't see eye to eye on politics, we just don't talk about politics, which is one solution to it. And I think it's generally a good solution when you're talking about family and friends and relationships. I don't think you have to be on the same political page. But I don't think it's socioeconomic at all. You could argue that maybe more people in the comfortable middle class are more prone to it, certainly, because they are more comfortable. They have the luxury of not caring about politics. It doesn't really impact them in their day-to-day lives. When it impacts them, watch out. A lot of people are like that. I know a lot of people, they didn't give a flying F about politics until it impacted them. And the moment it did, suddenly, they're in the street protesting. Suddenly they were mad. I've had people, because I follow a lot of stuff and I talk about the news every day on my videos, they'll sometimes ask me or call me and say, hey, what's this subject? What's going on here? And sometimes I will give them my opinion on what's going on, and I do know something about it. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I do know something about it because I keep up with this. And then they will, having just gotten the information from me, turn around and go, that can't be right. Yeah, you're crazy. That'll be it. And you might say, well, maybe you're wrong. I might be. But see, I kind of acknowledge that. The people who I think, again, I would call them like sheeple. The sheeple are just kind of like, well, I've seen on all three news stations, for instance. We have three, maybe four major news stations here. So people who still sort of equate TV news with some level of reality, they might flip between those stations and go, oh, they're all saying the same thing. Oh, a hurricane's coming, for instance, right? Oh, the hurricane landed, and it was terrible, and they all said that. So you can take that to the bank, right? But politics, policy, and other things aren't the same thing. But they don't make that distinction. They just go, well, I mean, 4 different channels said it. It must be true, right? And you could see the logic in it, but if you're that out of the loop in terms of how communication in the mainstream media has completely failed us, you have to just be aghast that people still believe the things they do. I'm aghast. I mean, I talked to somebody not too long ago, one of my older relatives. They're absolutely convinced Trump is still a Russian spy. The Russiagate thing, 100%, they're on board. They think, oh yeah, he's a Russian stooge. This is why, Stephen Colbert, although he doesn't have a big enough audience to justify the insane expense of his show, this is why he still had some audience. Because these are people who, they're checked out. They're caught up in their lives, and they do not care one whit about politics. And I can understand your frustration when you see the problems and you see it coming from government and you want a change, and these people are just checked out and they're just voting labor because that's what they do every year. It's the institutional momentum of their belief system. And they won't be shook out of it until it directly impacts one of them. So, for instance, if one of them, and even then, it may not shake them out of it. If one of them, for instance, gets very sick and they have to go to the NHS and use the services, and they get there and there's just this enormous line of migrants, and nobody speaks English, and they wait hours and they get turned away, or get a ridiculously, they're sick and they feel miserable and they just get turned away. That's a real problem, and that might be a wake-up call. It might not be. I mean, I could tell you that my relative that I described, they are a hardhead. I have tried a lot of things to say, listen, at least open your mind to the concept that maybe you're being lied to. Maybe some of this information isn't true. It won't be until that MSNBC and The View completely collapses and is off the air that they might start changing their opinion, because they won't be fed that info all the time. And at that point, it may not even matter. I don't know how old they'll be at that point, but that day is coming. And that's what it takes. Like, it takes something extreme to shake people out of their days. Even now, we're fighting to have to flip New Jersey red. And even now, it's really tough. Number one, there's still a lot of Democrats here who, again, most people are checked out. they've been coasting on the Democratic Party for years, and everything's been, relatively speaking, fine for them. Even, they don't follow every little detail about politics. All they know is what they sort of skim off TV news and sort of in their random life, bump into. Doesn't matter that Tommy Robinson drew 1 million people to London for a protest. They only skim the news, as I do on my newscast, and they got the gist of it. And the gist of it, well, how does your news report about Tommy? They always say, oh, a bunch of racists showed up in London. They said they had 300,000 people, but it was closer to 30. That's all they get. That's it. That's about as much as they're going to tune in. So what do they get out of Tommy's protest? They don't know he got 1 million people. They don't know he's deep down a good guy. Has been trying to, stop the grooming gangs, amongst other things. They don't see him as a patriot. Nobody told them it was okay to think that. There's no validation in their world. It's just what they skimmed off the news. Their news sources is bad. You could tell them they're bad, but they're too lazy to. It's not that important to them. Their patriotism is not that important. What is important to them is looking like a good person, like you say. For women, it's much more important. And I think it's very much a men-woman thing. The men who go along with this are often very cucked, as you point out in your video. Extremely cucked. They are weak and mentally and physically, but they kind of don't know what to do. And at the same time, they know in the back of their head, if they do push out of their current position, they're screwed. Their wife is going to give them a lot of grief. A lot of grief. And they may be forced to do things that they don't want to do. Their comfortable life will not be comfortable anymore. It may lead to a divorce. There's a lot of women who are caught up in this, and they are 100% won't cross that line. I know in this country, there are women who won't date MAGA. There are women who've divorced their husbands when they supported Trump. Not a lot, but enough. It's a real concern. It's a real concern. So they may just go along to get along, as they say. The women, well, I think they will change, because it's no longer going to be you're a good person for supporting labor or supporting the migrants. It's going to be you're a good person for supporting patriotism. You're a good person for supporting Nigel Farage. Is it Neil? Neil Farage? No, that doesn't sound right. I don't know. Farage. You're a good person for supporting Farage. That's when they move over. They have to see the change. They don't care about the actual politics, I think, for a lot of women and some men. And again, it's not socioeconomic. They have to see, oh yeah, this is the right move for me and my image. So I look like a good person. I have to wave England's flag. I think the flag movement, or whatever you want to call it, is a good idea, because I think some women are at least looking at that and going, oh, I don't have a flag. Should I get an English flag? Oh, those guys are saying it's racist, but those guys over there are having a good time and they're all patting each other on the back. I'm not sure. Like, that's something that cracked the veneer, which is why you concluded that you were going to win. You are going to win. But if you're going to win the women, I think you need something that makes it obvious to them that it's now okay to, for instance, support deporting all the illegals, right? Maybe it's an incident. I mean, you had many, but maybe it's one that finally resonates with a lot of these women who are comfortable in their world, that to not support the deportations will make them look bad, and therefore they must support them. And therefore, they can say to their friends, well, I, of course, don't really like Farage, but after what happened, I have to support him and, the removal of these illegal migrants. And that's the angle I think you should really take. You should, and Farage, right? You got to focus on the illegal migrants first. And then you can move on to the other ones, to, for instance, some illegal aliens who, or not the illegal aliens, but legal, quote unquote, aliens who were made legal due to circumstances that weren't proper in your government, or legal immigrants who have now committed crimes, right? That could be some. I think that's what they're doing here, for at least part of it. ICE may pick up guys who, or at least going through the process of becoming a citizen, but then they find out they committed crimes, or they're on some sort of, I don't know, probationary thing on the way to citizenship, but maybe they steal a car and then it's like out the country, something like that. But to classify it, and I understand you're mad at the media. I'm mad at the media. You're mad at these people who are just very soft and comfortable in their lives, and they're just sitting there while your country goes to hell. I totally understand that frustration. I felt that frustration during Biden. Like, my God, this guy's an idiot. He's a senile old mummy. We have to remove him from power. He shouldn't even be here. Who the hell voted for this clown? How could you cheat for this guy? I get it, but I didn't blame the middle class, because there were plenty of, upper class guys who voted for Biden. In fact, there were a lot of them. And there were a couple of, I'm sure, dopey lower class people who would vote for him too, just because, I don't know, they just did the math and said, oh, Democrats, they give us money, right? Yeah, let me vote for him. These people have imperfect knowledge. They don't have perfect knowledge. They have bad knowledge, a lot of them. They just don't know what's going on. They're deeply ignorant of the issues. They vote how they vote because, sometimes it's about their image. Sometimes it's just they got the wrong information. So it's not a good look, Carl, to do a thing about I despise the bourgeoisie, because you're making it a class issue, and it's woke. There's no other way around it. It is woke. You're classifying people like people on the left do, and then you're saying, yeah, those people are the problem. That's not very accurate. I understand your frustration with large groups of people who, have let the country go to hell, but they're not definitively middle class. As you say in your own video, you sort of separate the blue collar guys. Most of those guys tend not to be, but it's a tendency. It's not an exact thing, right? It's a tendency. And there are some people in the media class that wear lanyards or whatever. I'm sure they watch your show. And I'm sure they're big supporters. More of them, again, tend to be male, female, and Scott Adams makes this point. The men tend to be more protective. So it's their job to protect the country, to protect the women from an invasion. So naturally they skew towards conservatism, because that's, responsibility and the proper thing to do, and the women don't. They skew towards being nurturing, even at their own expense. So let me wrap this up. What I think the UK needs is more liberty. I think you need a Second Amendment like we have. I think you need a constitution closer to what we have. I feel that there's still a lot of mindset for the aristocracy in the UK, which is why a lot of it, I think you invested way too much in Neil. It is Neil, isn't it? Neil Farage. Now it sounds right. I think you invested too much time with him early on and then got betrayed by him. And I was a little surprised by that. I was like, what the hell is happening? I don't know who got to him, or maybe it was just always that way. But it needs to be a system that generates liberty. What would help your country, besides the deportation of many immigrants, is 2A, and a system with the checks and balances that America has, I think would greatly help a lot of your problems. It would require the dismantling of the NHS. It would require a banking system that would be very open and to your people. And it requires a massive, massive middle class. The middle class are your friend in that world. So I wish, instead of reading Karl Marx and the postmodernist, that you read more of Mises. You can read a lot of his works at Mises.org. Randolph Byrne, some of the more libertarian economists, because I think a lot of it stems from your government still not totally embracing capitalism. They don't really embrace it. They embrace a version of it with a lot of socialist trappings. The NHS being the most obvious example. If they got rid of the NHS and it was a free-for-all of competing hospitals and medical facilities, you would see all the prices go way down because they would compete. Now, there would still be lots of problems. There would be places that would offer cheap medical care and not deliver, and that's a real problem and has to be dealt with legally, civilly, and that's really hard. I mean, it would have to be there'd have to be laws, some amount of regulation, but the regulation needs to be light enough that it needs to be heavy enough that people aren't dying, but light enough that people can say, oh, wait, I don't want to go with you. I need to go with the other hospital, and I'm just going to sue you for the terrible care I got at that hospital. And it needs to be, the law enforcement end needs to be strong enough that the hospitals are actually wary. Well, we can't cheat people on their medical care here, or we'll get in a lot of trouble. We got to do everything above board. So that's the balance, at least with that. With the stuff like the media, I mean, again, the main problem is, I think, the BBC, your government-run media, that has to absolutely go. And I'm sure that's something you would love to see go. It should be sold off, rebranded, whatever. There could be a British Broadcasting Corporation, but it should just be run by the government. It should just be for, like, government announcements only, like that kind of channel. I could see you having that, and, it should just be one of those generic channels that people tune in. Oh, let me see what holiday is coming up, or let me see what the Prime Minister is saying today. If you have one at all. And now you can do that stuff on the internet anyway. But yeah, you need to liberate your people. Not liberation, but liberate your people from taxes and all these, all this bureaucracy. But you would need to replace it with a system that encourages liberty, encourages freedom. I think delving into the class warfare mindset is very bad. I think you need to get out of that mindset and start looking at even some of the guys who, like Thomas Paine and those guys, more it needs to be more liberty-based. It needs to be more capitalist and libertarian with a small L. The Libertarian Party, yeah, don't use them as a guide. We're embarrassed by them. Anyhow, I hope this helps, and I really hope liberty comes to the UK very, very soon. And that's it for me, Tony D, and Little Joan. This was the video I tried to do last night, but I was too tired to do it. And it was too incomprehensible when I shot it, so I did it again. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.